For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Did you know that the world will have to halve its carbon emissions over the next 7 years to avoid a catastrophe? Did you know that in the last century, India experienced about 4 natural disasters every year? And in the last 2 decades, this average has spiked to a staggering 17 per year. Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I am your host Anil Padmanabhan. Last week, the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released its 6th and final report. The AR6, as it is called, was a rude wake-up call for the entire world. Collectively, our carbon footprint is poised to cross the point of no return. Failure to adhere to a timetable over the next 7 years for mitigation will be inviting a catastrophe upon the world. To unpack these scary revelations, we spoke to Minal Pathak. She is a co-author of the report and Associate Professor of Environment at Ahmedabad University. As a co-author of the IPCC report and being a climate researcher gives Minal a vantage view. So I began by asking her the significance of the findings of the 6th report of the IPCC.
This report is significant. First of all, it's the last report of this IPCC cycle. It's the 6th assessment cycle of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it brings together, it's a summary of 3 main reports. The Working Group 1 report on physical climate science, Working Group 2 on impacts and adaptation, and Working Group 3 on mitigation. And also the 3 special reports in this cycle. So climate change at land, climate change at oceans and cryosphere, and the 1.5 degrees. So it's really a mega synthesis. It also comes at a critical time when we are globally, we're looking at the global stock take, when countries will talk about the progress they've made on the Paris Agreement goals. And it comprises contributions from over 100 scientists globally. So I think, and also we are very close to the timeline for SDGs. So for every reason, political, for SDGs, for climate action, for 1.5, for the remaining carbon budget, this report is significant.
So it's like everything is converging at this point of time, right? That's what you're saying. So what is the central takeaway from this report that you would share with our viewers?
Well, a lot has already been said, but I would just summarize to say that the main message is urgency. It's crunch time if we want to keep Paris in sight. And if we want to use the last available window to act, then I wouldn't even say it's a decade. I would say it's less than a decade. It's just like now or never.
The IPCC has made a frightening observation about climate change. It says it is now or never. I asked Minal to unpack this grim warning issued by the IPCC and to explain to us as to how circumstances became so inclement.
So there are 2 aspects to it. One is when we talk about the carbon budget. So when we published the 1.5 report 5 years ago, we said there was a remaining carbon budget. That was about 500 gigatons, roughly, with the uncertainties, right, of carbon dioxide. That's what the world had to limit warming to 1.5. 5 years down, we've exhausted over 100 gigatons already. So your remaining carbon budget is now 380 odd gigaton of carbon. And if we emit like about 40-50 gigatons a year, we have 8 years left, roughly. And that's alarming, because that means that we would breach the 1.5 threshold maybe in the early 2030s. So it was looking very far away back then, but it's not. It's looking like the near future. And the second aspect is on the risks that the world faces. Many regions across the world are already facing extreme heat, sea level rise, other associated impacts of climate change on agriculture and water availability, and also impacts on ecosystems. So these are going to get worse. Once we cross 1.5, there's going to be a lot of extreme events that you're going to see, which were sitting in the projections, but there will be, for example, insufficient fresh water for people to continue living on small islands and regions. There may be irreversible changes on warm water coral reefs, and some of those changes are irreversible. So we might lose coral reefs forever in some parts of the world. In many parts of the world, there will be more wildfires, extreme weather in many parts of the world. So I can go on, but basically, climate change is now an existential threat to human well-being, to livelihoods, to ecosystems, and to nature.
Is this then the tipping point for the world in its battle against climate change?
Well, by the mitigation report that we published last year, emissions should have peaked before 2025. So we are actually literally at the tipping point where we need we have reached the peak of fossil fuel consumption. We just have to go steeply down from here in terms of energy use and fossil fuels. So yes, and in terms of climate impacts, yes, we are at the tipping points because we are already witnessing these changes all over the world.
Minal is right. The world has to act now if it has to avoid breaching the temperature rise cap of 1.5 degrees centigrade. But then, how do developing countries deal with the trade-off between environment and development?
That is correct, but so there's a caveat here. One is that it's not always a trade-off. The report shows that there are climate actions that can actually deliver development benefits depending on how they're implemented. So I can give some examples like shifting to healthier diets, moving to cleaner transport. These are win-wins, even for like countries like India, where the current form of transportation is unsustainable regardless of climate change. Imagine the climate problem was not there. Still, this model of car-dependent growth doesn't work for us. We depend on imported oil. So there are many actions that align with development. That's the message really we want to give. But I do agree with you that there is equity and fairness essential to climate action. So there are going to be trade-offs, and we also recognize that all countries are not at the same starting point, and therefore every country's capacity to address climate change is different, and it will definitely require hand-holding by the wealthier countries which have more capacity to act. And for countries like India, we are at a unique point, right? We also have to develop. We have all these simultaneous challenges, whereas some countries which have already developed, so they don't have to worry about, for example, providing clean water or sanitation. So we are in a bit of a jam in India, and I would say that for a lot of developing countries, especially more so for the least developed countries. So there is a trade-off, but we have to understand where the trade-offs are rather than generally saying that, oh, countries cannot act because there are trade-offs. So it depends on the argument and how it's laid out.
So Minal, the subtext of what you said is that you can develop, but you can develop clean development like green development, and which may be costly, but it's sustainable, right?
It may be costly, but we also, from the assessment, can say that the benefits outweigh the costs in most cases. But there is an upfront cost to some of these, for example, and there is also capacity to some of these, like if you talk about technology or if you talk about finance. So maybe initially some of these countries need support, but in the long run, it's a better deal because it protects population, it delivers well-being benefits. We're also talking about land and water here, right? That the way current methods of food production and consumption are not sustainable. So if we change some of these, not all of these solutions are necessarily high cost, or in fact, some of them could actually deliver better development, better outcomes for gender. So we have to look at these solutions within the context. Not all solutions will be great everywhere, and not every country can implement every solution in an accelerated way. So IPCC reports are global, which means that they lay down the menu of options. Now, what you cook from that menu of option depends on where you are and what you can consume at that point.
So, Minal, you mentioned the cost-benefit analysis. I believe the IPCC synthesis report we are referring to does one for air quality. Can you unpack it for our viewers?
Cost-benefit analysis is a bit tricky because the benefits are not always economic. So we do highlight that the economic benefits of avoided air pollution are higher than the costs, But there are also a lot of other benefits which you cannot measure, right? Like my own well-being gains. How do I put a monetary value on that? And therefore, that is actually a very good argument for taking climate action. That there are potential benefits which you cannot even measure, and therefore, traditional cost-benefit analysis should just be used as one of the reasons for climate action. But there's a whole lot of other reasons to act now.
Minal is introducing a new grammar to the traditional debate on environment versus development. In fact, the IPCC's Fight Back strategy is based on this new lexicon.
The blueprint, the meta blueprint for change is the shift in development pathways. It's the shift in thinking of the current models and means of development. That continuing along the current resource intensive method of development is not really going to get us there. So that's one. The second one is that probably we need everything everywhere all at once. And I'm quoting the movie title, but that now the time for picking and choosing options has gone. And we probably need like everything from technology to behavior change to policy. And the third one is probably incremental changes are not enough. And I already highlighted a transformative shift, but maybe a range of multiple incremental changes within an overall transformation. But we really need to think of climate change and development together, and not climate change as something that had to be managed, because now it has to be embedded within the wider development context. And if you ask me about action, then the first one, the big one, would be changing our energy mix. Shifting away from fossil fuels, whether we like it or we don't like it, or whether it's difficult or easy. But that definitely needs to be said, that we cannot continue going along with fossil fuels the way we are. So that is one. The second thing is overall, and that's where my own research focuses on urban development. That how do we build our cities? How do we look at, do people necessarily need to travel 30 minutes, 40 minutes away from their home? How do we move around in cities, but also I'm talking about intercity transport of freight. What are we doing about our consumption patterns? Is it sustainable for us to go on consuming, even if there are aspirations? I recognize that we live in a country where there are aspirations. People want to own cars. People want to move away from buses to buy their own vehicle. They want to buy their own house. But then on the other hand, we're also looking at overconsumption, where a section of the population is now moving from 3-bedroom houses to 4-bedroom houses. The rooms are getting larger. People are owning multiple houses and farmhouses and luxury houses and SUVs. And we are importing food. So there's a lot of, so in terms of menu of options, I would say behavioral change and lifestyle is an important component alongside energy use. So it's technology efficiency, change in fuels, and behavioral change to sum it.
So in that sense, India's proposal, I'm not sure it was at Paris or at Glasgow, on life becomes very critical, right?
It is very significant. I think it's a great bold step. But now the next step is, how do you translate that? How do you make it happen? And it's like, one thing is announcing and thinking through, and it aligns so well with India's cultural values and background. My mom used to save everything, and they used to reuse and recycle. All these fancy words, they obviously did not know circular economy, but they were practicing it. So life brings all of this together, and I really like the intent behind it. But now we need to see a clear roadmap, especially of how the private sector is going to help in this initiative.
To recap our conversation so far, the IPCC has identified 4 gaps: adaptation, mitigation, finance, and communication. The subtext of IPCC's mitigation blueprint implies a collective response. But in a deeply polarized world, is this a fair assumption to make?
I think it's too late to give up. So I don't know what this conversation, what tone it would take maybe 5 years from now if we were having this, let's say in 2027 or 28. But we are at a point where it's possible, and we should make all efforts to do it. And I wouldn't give up yet to say that it's probably not possible. It's still possible. Well, there are issues in the world, right? We had COVID, and we have the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and there are other energy security, food security issues, and amidst that, climate change is really a complex issue. But I would just say that, like, as an IPCC author now, it is now or never, and we cannot afford to think that it's not possible. We just have to make it happen. And there's sort of a more hopeful ending to what is a really depressing problem.
But do you feel inspired by the way the world responded to the COVID-19 challenge? It's the same divided world, but somehow they came together. Does that inspire you? I mean, that
We took lessons from COVID. COVID inspired large-scale behavioral change to the extent that we've never seen before, or at least in a very long time. So I think there were some good lessons in COVID, but there were also some trade-offs for some populations, and we have seen that, and that also applies to climate change. That in solving climate change, it may also result in some trade-offs, and we are aware of those, and we have to make sure that it doesn't worsen the existing problems.
you heard Minal. The writing is on the wall with respect to climate change. The world, particularly the rich nation, has to wake up and smell the coffee. Act now or repent later at leisure. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Strat News Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, insights, and ideas with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.